Here's an example of the essay portion of your visual interpretation of a poem. Unlike the little speech insertions that you're going to put in the PowerPoint, your language should be much more academic in this essay portion because you have time to think about it and time to write. So it's a little less conversational and more academic, certainly. I always start with the works cited. I think maybe I need to put a comma there instead of a period. So for the works cited, you're only citing one work because you're only quoting from the poem. That's why it's work cited singular. Create the hanging indent. If you haven't created the hanging indent, you can highlight it. Go next to paragraph, there's a little square there. And under special, mine says hanging, and I can put none to make it back to normal. So if yours looks like this, you want to make it a hanging indent by going next to paragraph, click the little square, and create a hanging indent. That's good. The works cited goes on the last page of your essay. It's not a separate document, so that's why it says page 4 there with your last name in the top right corner. I put last name because if I put Morris, then students will put Morris for some reason. So put your actual last name. Your heading should have your first and last name, and then your instructor's name, your class, and the due date of your assignment. Notice there is no space between the heading and the title of the essay. Center the title of the essay. Do not make it a bigger font or bold or underlined or in quotation marks. Just come up with a creative, original title. Your title should not be visual interpretation of a poem or visual interpretation of In the Park or whatever your poem is. You should come up with a creative, original title based on, for example, this one's based on the mood, the sort of unexpected ending even of this sonnet that I am presenting. So some things about essays in general. You start with an introduction. The introduction should start with a sentence that is generally about the theme. So the purpose of a first sentence is to relate to your readers in some way. So if you just start right in talking about the work of literature and you haven't sort of connected with your audience by talking about a universal truth, a universal experience that all humans have, or all humans have seen or are aware of or can relate to, then they're just kind of caught out of nowhere. So I always recommend starting with a sentence that just is a general statement about the theme that you're going to be exploring further in a certain work of literature. Then later, in the middle of the introduction, or maybe even the second sentence, that would be fine, then you can introduce the poem. This middle sentence in my introduction gives the name and the title, name of the poet and the title of the poem. So you should do that for sure. Generally, you'll give a one-sentence summary. You do not want a book report. You don't want a summary of the whole poem. Like this happens, then that happens, and then this other thing happens. You want to focus. There will be some summary because you have to set context for what you're writing about concerning theme and concerning the literary elements that you are showing in your essay that help add layers to the meaning or the exploration of that theme. So that's what you're doing. And to that end, you're going to need a thesis statement that mentions the literary elements and the theme. The thesis statement is generally the last sentence of your introductory paragraph. So mine mentions these specific literary elements, and I talk about motherhood as the theme, the expectations of motherhood. Then the body paragraphs, whatever literary elements you're putting in your thesis statement, make sure you describe those literary elements in that order in your essay. So it may be easier to rearrange your literary elements to fit with the essay's organization. That's usually the way it goes. If you find yourself writing, for example, if I were to have written about dialogue first, I would put dialogue first in my thesis statement. Please make sure you do your in-text citations correctly. There are videos all over Blackboard showing you the ways to integrate sources correctly. When you are quoting works of poetry, you cite the line numbers. And the reason this particular sentence has the line numbers next to little bits of the poem is because I integrated my parts of the poem using mostly my words to make it flow in a way that sounds like I would tell a colleague about what's happening in this poem. So only the words I borrowed from the poem are in quotation marks. And so within the sentence, since I used some of my own words, the ones without quotation marks around them, I used some of my own words to connect the ideas. That means I needed to indicate which lines I'm quoting. I don't have line right here next to close because it's still clear that this is part of line 1 because I didn't change it up. And again, all these phrases here are from line 2. So I didn't do it after every one. It only is required if you are using a lot of words between and it's unclear that flows in the line that way. So after you have quoted something, the next sentence after the lines you've quoted should either restate the quotation in your own words or interpret that quotation. What are these words doing in the poem? Why do they matter? So that should be your next sentence or series of sentences. And then, like we did with the close reading exercise earlier this semester, relate it back to the universal truth, the theme of the poem. Okay? You'll notice that my sentences are fairly long, and you want a good variety of sentences. So here's one that I put in that's really short. So don't underestimate the power of a good short sentence to really hone in on what your overall point is. It really helps the reader refocus when you've written a lot of long sentences and feel like, oh, that's what we're talking about, and I see that all these long sentences are giving me details and illustrations of this point. For traditional standard quoting of poetry, remember to do the / to separate lines. We want to honor the line numbers or the line breaks that the poet chose. So we show that even when we're quoting them within our paragraphs by putting a / to show that line break. For introducing this quotation, I used an independent clause. An independent clause is something that could be a complete sentence if I put a period at the end. The reason I don't put a period at the end of this independent clause is because I must put some of my own words around the quotation. If I just put a period here and then have this quotation, it's a dropped quotation. That is not okay. So anything I quote needs to be introduced by my words, and that means it needs to be connected to my words in some way. So if I want to put a full sentence before something I'm quoting, I still connect it by using a colon here. Again, the line numbers, just put lines, whatever the line numbers are. Notice at the end here where there might have been a period or a comma at the end of this line, I have saved the period until after the parenthetical citation. A period means full stop, and we don't want to fully stop the idea until we have finished with the parenthetical citation. Now, if you're quoting more than 3 lines, you'll need a blocked quotation. There are videos on Blackboard to review dropped quotations. I didn't use any in my essay. This sample essay is on Blackboard, so make sure you read over it. Notice how I talk about the images. So I'm still talking about my PowerPoint presentation without saying I chose this image because I just say the image of a person with empty thought bubbles conveys the emptiness of the conversation. So this is describing one of the images I chose for the PowerPoint, but I didn't say I chose an image for the PowerPoint because I'm not writing in first person. If I'm writing in first person, the focus becomes me, and I want the focus to be on the poem and the images that help relate between what the poet writes and what happens in one's mind when reading the poem. So we're thinking about mental images created that we can sort of convey in a PowerPoint illustration, visual interpretation of the poem, if you will. It looks like I need to fix a quotation mark. It was in the wrong place. So the conclusion should be one that starts with the thesis statement stated in a new way, and then leaves the reader with some concluding thoughts. The big so what is what I call the conclusion, and you want to relate something about what you have discussed as the theme of the poem to a theme or an experience that is a universal human experience, or one that is commonly experienced by people. Your essay will be about between 500 and 800 words. If you need more, let me know. I don't think you will. You're just focused on lines of the poem and the images that you feel best convey those lines in some way. So let me know if you have questions. You can contact me through the Blackboard email where it says email Miss Morris.